Professor Holst, thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to interview you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
For us. Revista de Occidente, I don't know, you know a little bit about Revista de Occidente. Revista de Occidente was founded 100 years ago by Ortega y Gasset, one of our greatest philosophers. Mm-hmm. And the aim of the mission of this Revista de Occidente is to disseminate culture, humanities, and also scientific knowledge. Good. So I think you are a great person to be here.
Thank you.
One thing I want to say is just congratulations for your prize. I think it's really, you deserve it.
Thank you.
And because your research has changed, I think, the world of the diabetes and the metabolic symptoms. But first of all, we want to know a little bit more about you. You were telling me 5 minutes ago that you worked 15 years in emergency ward.
Yeah.
So you know quite a lot of patients.
Yeah. So first of all, I am a medical doctor by training. I finished my studies in 1970. And then I started education as a surgeon. And that was my ambition, you know. And, I got my first position at the surgical department, and I knew this was it. This was really me. And so I was working hard to establish myself in that. What happened then was that the head of the department became professor at the university. And as such, he was entitled to have a scientific assistant. That became me, you see. So science became a part of my job as a surgeon. But as I told you, I was continuing working at the emergency ward for 16 years after I stopped at the department, which was in 1977. Eventually, it turned out that I had done more research than surgery. So there was a position at the university as associate professor, and I applied for it, and I got it. And so that's what happened. But fortunately, I could continue at the emergency ward, which was a lot of fun because I've seen everything almost, you know. So I am a doctor.
You are a doctor. And of course, because you are a doctor and endocrinologist, then you have seen many patients that have suffered many different illnesses, and it's something that I want to talk a little bit later. You know, Gregorio Marañón, which is one of the founders of the foundation, he was an endocrinologist himself. He was very interested in the adrenal hormones and also in the thyroid hormones, but I'm sure that he would be fascinated with the glucagon-like peptides.
Yeah, so, in 1973, I attended my first endocrinology congress. Mm-hmm. And we were having some beer afterwards, after one of the sessions, and I was sitting there with a group of British endocrinologists, and they asked me politely what I was doing, and I said, I'm interested in gut hormones. And then they turned away and said they found my presence in the gut disgusting.
Yeah, probably the gut is one of the parts of the body that most of the people don't think about, and now it's so important. We will talk later about the gut-brain axis, which is really important. I'm a psychiatrist myself, but when I finished my studies of psychiatry, I really wanted to do psychoneuroendocrinology, and we do not have this specialty in Spain. I don't think if it's anywhere in the world, but I think it's more necessary now than it was 30 years ago when I finished my studies.
Absolutely.
What do you think about it?
No, I completely agree. And we from that part of the world have always been saying that the gut was the largest endocrine organ in the body, and it not only with the most cells, but also with the largest number of hormones in it. So it has been, to us, it's been a fantastic, rich opportunity to do research on many different fields. Actually, one of the most exciting fields was when we discovered that a new peptide that had just been discovered, VIP, vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, and when we raised antibodies and were looking for it. And we thought it might be a hormone, but it was not. It was a neurotransmitter. So this was one of the first peptide neurotransmitters that was ever discovered. And this was really a huge discovery. opening this field of peptidergic nerves, which are all over the place these days, and playing fantastic important roles. Think of the therapy of migraine, because with CGRP, which is another of the gut peptides, where the antibodies against the CGRP now can cure a lot of attacks of migraine. That's a very good example of this.
Yeah, for sure, that's true. Let's talk now more about your research. Because we know the insulin was discovered 100 years ago by Balint and Best and MacLeod, and soon after they discovered the insulin, they were able to treat patients with insulin. And glucagon was also, the incretin system was also discovered 100 years ago.
1923, yes, that's true.
And it took hundreds of years until you and your team were able to discover the glucagon-like peptide.
Yes, it was a long story. The idea that something from the gut would stimulate insulin secretion was present already in 1930. Some Belgian researchers were proving that this had to be the case. But there were a couple of American physiologists that said this is rubbish. They didn't believe it. So it was put on hold, the whole research field, for 30 years because of these Americans who said that this was not true. Ivy and Morton Grossman, they were the ones that responsible for toning down this field. And then eventually, with the possibility to measure insulin, which was Burson and Yallow in 1977, it could be tested whether or not there was indeed a stimulation from the gut of insulin secretion, and there was. So this was in 1964, where the incretin effect really was demonstrated. So the next question, and this is where we got started, is what hormones are responsible for this intestinal stimulation of insulin secretion? So this was the question, and we're trying to see what might be the case here. We were working closely with a laboratory in Stockholm, that of Victor Mutt, where they were boiling pig intestines. And they did that, they were boiling the pig intestines from 10,000 pigs and came up with the chemical structure of the very first hormone, secretin. With the discovery of more of these peptides from the gut, it was interesting and exciting and fascinating to see if any of these could explain the incretin effect. And eventually there was one, that is the GIP hormone. It came from Stockholm. It was a Canadian working there, looking for a hormone that would inhibit acid secretion, nothing to do with diabetes. You didn't talk about diabetes those days. And it turned out that this peptide, when infused to people, would also stimulate insulin secretion. And that changed the whole picture, of course. Now we have a peptide. But it didn't work in people with diabetes. And for various reasons, it was not really interesting. So there still had to be something else. And I was looking at some cells in the gut that had glucagon immunoreactivity. They would light up with antibodies against glucagon. And since people knew that glucagon would stimulate insulin secretion, if these cells were producing glucagon or something like it, maybe they could be responsible for the incretin effect. So that was the thing. At the same time, I was not forgetting my surgical past. I was working in a department where we were treating peptic ulcer disease with surgery, vagotomies or gastrectomies, right? And some of our patients developed hypoglycemia, reactive hypoglycemia after the meals. And we knew that these people made too much insulin. So the question was, would there be a connection here? Would some of these hormones from the gut, would they be responsible for this? So that was the aim. That was my project, to find out what is doing this. Why do these people have hypoglycemia? What is the incretin hormone that we're missing? And there were these cells with something like glucagon in them. And so this was what happened. A lot of research, a lot of work went into this, and eventually, in 1981, we had the structure of this peptide. It is called glycentin, and it is a big peptide that has glucagon in the middle. And that explained why it reacted with the glucagon antibodies, of course. But this was a big and probably inactive peptide. We still really don't know what it does. So this looked like a dead end, right? But then we could tell. We could find the bits and pieces also in the pancreas. And we realized that this had to be the precursor of glucagon. This was the early precursor, the pro-hormone of glucagon itself. So it was expressed in the gut and in the pancreas. In the pancreas, glucagon would be cleaved out of this precursor hormone and be the hormone we know. In the gut, it would remain together in the glycine molecule. And you could have said, okay, what's so funny about that? But we also knew at the time that pro-glucagon had to be bigger than glycine. Glycine is 69 amino acids. Pro-glucagon had to be at least twice as large from various experiments we and others did. So the question is, what was in the rest of pro-glucagon? And there, an American molecular biologist called Graham Bell was the first one to pull out the mRNA from hamster pancreases and then clone the cDNA from them and find out what the coding structure would be. And he found out that yes, 1/2 of pro-glucagon was glycine, as we had predicted. The other half was interesting because it had a glucagon-like stretch and another glucagon-like stretch, 2 glucagon-like stretches in it. Glucagon-like peptide 1, glucagon-like peptide 2. And this, of course, was hugely interesting. So immediately we synthesized those peptides, we made antibodies against them, we made radioimmunoassays against them and started to look for them. So what turned out was that in the pancreas, they were put together in a big molecule, just like the glucagon in the gut. One big molecule, and where both GLP-1 and GLP-2 were, and that big molecule is probably also inactive. So that was a dead end again. But in the gut, the 2 stretches were formed separately, so a GLP-1 and a GLP-2, and we could even show that they were secreted because we had a pig model where we could analyze this. So, here are some new hormones, very, very exciting. So we took our synthetic peptides and put them on. I had a perfused pig pancreas in those days, so a wonderful tool, I love it still. And it could produce insulin, and we could put the peptides on and see what happens, and nothing happened. Nothing happened. So something was wrong. So then we said to ourselves, no, let's go for the real peptide. Let's go for the natural peptide. So we extracted intestines from people and from pigs and isolated, using our assays, isolated the real GLP-1 molecule and put that on the pancreas. And now we had a fantastic insulin secretion. So that was the day when we found GLP-1. This was really true. So, and we found out what was wrong because it was a different structure from that predicted from the cDNA. It was truncated by 6 amino acids and also at the C-terminus. And that the natural peptide, which was the one we tested, it stimulated insulin secretion. So that was the story.
Well, interesting story. It seems to me that is as important as the insulin. Do you have the feeling that your research is as important as when we got to know some insulin? Because
now that's the difference, because without insulin you die. Without the gut hormones, you get glucose intolerant and you may develop diabetes. That is true, but you won't die immediately, but it will take some time and then you will die. So you can say that it takes a longer time, but there's still important hormones for glucose tolerance. That is true. That is true. Perhaps it's even more important for the regulation of food intake, but here there are competing mechanisms, so I'm not sure that... Actually, we should know that.
Well, my feeling is this, because there are now new drugs or many drugs delivered with your researches that are used in different illnesses.
Yes.
For instance, in psychiatric illness,
yes.
It seems that GLP-1 agonists can be useful to treat addiction. Or depression,
yes, that's true. Yeah.
Or maybe some eating disorders. So what is the mechanism? It's not only because you don't feel hunger, but there are many other implications,
Yes.
I think.
So yeah, a lot of important questions that you're raising here. I think so. One of so let's go back to when we actually were standing here with a white powder from the gut. GLP-1. What does it do? So now we know that it stimulated insulin secretion. That's nice. It turned out in our hands that it also inhibited glucagon secretion, which is even nicer because that is something where the people with type 2 diabetes have a problem. They make too much glucagon that keeps their glucose up. So if you can hit that also, you have a double target here. So that was wonderful. But then, we started trying to understand what does it do, this new peptide? I mean, is there anything else than insulin and glucagon secretion? And we started to look at the gut. So we were looking at secretion and motility in the gut, and it also had important effects on that. And they were all exerted via the brain, via the vagus nerve, we found out. And eventually, of course, we also looked at food intake because it was known that the gut would somehow regulate food intake. And so it was natural for us to look for that, and we did that in people and found out that it inhibited food intake also. So now we're all of a sudden onto something different. I mean, so this is a signal from this distal small intestine, from the ileum as we call it, that segment. So once foodstuff arrives at the ileum, normally with smaller meals, it doesn't get to the ileum, it's absorbed before. But with larger meals, and if you eat too much, you will engage the distal part of the small intestine also, and there will be GLP-1 secreted that will signal to the brain, stop eating, no appetite, and it will also stop emptying of the stomach. It will also inhibit secretion of acid and pancreatic secretion and slow down all the absorptive process to make them fit with the capacity of the small intestine for absorption, so that you don't get ill. So we call it an ileal brake hormone. It is a regulatory substance that regulates your food intake and your capacity for digestion according to the capacity of the gut. So that's the role of it, right? That's the physiological role of it. And then it turns out that it does a lot of other stuff. But the primary thing here was, yes, we're in the brain. We're in the brain both in terms of the mechanism of action on everything and also on appetite, of course.
And also, what is the role of the microbiota as well? Because now in Spain we talk a lot about microbiota, and it's very everything. Every time you go to a pharmacy, they ask or they say you have to take probiotics, and I think it's something related with this.
Yeah, that has been proposed at least, and so the truth is that if you take a GLP-1 agonist, you change your food intake, and you also change your microbiota. So what comes first, one or the other? If you make changes in your diet, you will change your microbiota, but you will not necessarily change your secretion of GLP-1 very much. So they're not associated very strongly in that way. I think it's been somewhat overinterpreted, the role of the microbiota, but there's no doubt that with GLP-1 agonists, you can change the microbiota, and you will do it. You will change your diet automatically. You will stay away from very fatty substances, and you will, probably because of the mechanism of action, which is a little bit associated with nausea or something like that. But so that will happen. But I'm pretty sure that the actions of GLP-1 agonists can be done without the contribution of the microbiota, but it's there.
It's there. It's there.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the diabetes. What do you think about this diabetes and obesity is like a pandemic all over the world? I don't know if in Denmark is as an important issue than in Spain. We have a lot of diabetes, the type 2 diabetes, and United States obesity is a pandemic, and so.
We're not as bad as the United States, but we are probably more similar to Spain, I would think. So we have a problem, absolutely, that's true.
And these drugs that has been able to be developed because of your researches, you think that they are going to change all these metabolic disease, the prognosis at least.
What really occupies my mind is that we have what we call the metabolic syndrome, remember? And that is visceral obesity, which is number one thing, and then it's disturbances of lipid metabolism, it's disturbances of glucose, it's disturbances of heart rate, and once you have all of these, you have the metabolic syndrome, right? And then in that situation, your risk of developing cardiovascular disease and to die from it is accelerated by threefold or something like that. So these people are at risk of developing severe complications and dying. And now we know that with the GLP-1 agonist, you can actually do something about that. You can reduce that risk very importantly. So my vision is to bring the GLP-1 agonist to everybody who has the metabolic syndrome, to prevent them from developing these complications and to die.
Well, I think it's going to be very important for psychiatric patients. Most of my patients end up with a metabolic syndrome. We don't know if it's because of the illness,
yes,
because they are not able to take care of themselves.
Some of the medications also.
Or because of the medication, because they don't do exercise. So it's going to change.
I've actually participated in a couple of studies about this, and it helps, You can actually do it with the GLP-1 agonist. You can counteract some of the side effects of the antipsychotic treatment. So this is very important, I think. Yes, you're right. Absolutely.
And the other thing, do you think, maybe it's not clear, but do you think diabetes and obesity are inflammatory illness?
So I think that they are associated with they're associated with inflammation, and this aggravates the problem. It's probably one of the main mechanisms in the development of the complications of the metabolic syndrome, I think. So from that point of view, it's of course it's hugely encouraging that the GLP-1 therapies reduce inflammation, because this is something that they really appear to do. The other recipient, Dan Drucker, has worked a lot with that in rodents, but it's still a prominent action of the GLP-1 agonist. Inflammatory markers are always improved very nicely and quite profoundly by GLP-1 therapy. So to the extent that this contributes to the problems of obesity and cardiovascular disease and diabetes, yes, this is an important part of it. I really think so.
Well, I think inflammation now is, for doctors, we are paying a lot of attention to inflammation. When I finished my studies, genetics, most of the illnesses have some of genetics,
yes,
or were genetic, maybe if we didn't know how many genes were affected, or where it could be secondary to the environment. And if the environment is against you, you can have the illness or not. But now, I have the feeling that maybe it's not genetics or the environment. The inflammation could be the bridge between genetics and the environment.
So I think you're right in that respect, but let me again emphasize that what one of the other prize winners, Jeff Friedman, said a few days ago, that he emphasized that the hereditability of obesity is almost 90%, he said. This is a higher figure than I usually hear, but that was his feeling, that it is a very, very heritable trait. And from that respect, I think that what is important here is that if you have this heritable trait, then you are at risk of developing, at a greater risk than the rest of the population, and that there is your problem, right? So with modern society, with no exercise and bad food, and the heritability and the genetic background, that's when the trouble arises. But the point I was making is that we have the metabolic syndrome thing. That's about a quarter of the adult population, so that's a huge number of people. But I still think it's something you could do. So do we have other examples of treatments that we start, even if it's for a very large part of the population? Yes, we do. Vision. Yeah. Everybody wears glasses almost these days, right? Because you have to do something about it, and you can do it. And actually, people pay that themselves, don't they? Most of them.
Yes.
Yes. So, I mean, you have a bit of a parallel situation there, don't you?
Yes, of course. other questions. It has been difficult to develop a drug or after your research, because sometimes we know there is the glucagon agonist, and then to have the medication. It has taken a long time to develop this.
Yes, I've actually written a book about this. it's coming out in an English edition here in November, so yeah, you can see the whole story with all the. But you're right, there were a lot of complications, and one initial complication was the associated with a side effect, which is the nausea and the vomiting. Mm-hmm. So once we had demonstrated that infusions of GLP-1, the hormone, the peptide hormone, to people with diabetes could completely normalize their glucose levels, we did that in '93. We were, of course, anxious to start treating people with diabetes. You can't treat them with a drip, right, an intravenous infusion. But so we were giving them injections. We found out that they didn't work very well. The only thing that we really obtained was a lot of nausea and vomiting with the high doses. So that's been the problem all the time. So it didn't work very well. Why was that? That's because it's being degraded. It's metabolized incredibly quickly. So here you have a hormone that is with a half-life of 1 to 2 minutes in the body. It's a ridiculous hormone, so you can't use that. Well, we worked on it. We found out what was wrong. It was an enzyme called dipeptidyl peptidase 4, DPP4, that was responsible. And as a result of that research, we could demonstrate that you could improve the survival of the hormone with inhibitors of that enzyme. And that became the DPP4 inhibitors that have been used all over the globe. Sitagliptin, Januvia, all over the globe. Millions and millions of people have had, better diabetes therapy with those compounds. So that was one pathway, which was, I'm pretty proud of it because this happened in our laboratory. Okay, but then the other part was perhaps we could stabilize the molecule against the peptide. And that was fairly easy because all you have to do is to change a single amino acid in position 2. And once you do that, you can do that, it's resistant towards this enzyme. So that helps. Then it turned out that the kidneys were also metabolizing and removing GLP-1 so that the half-life after you had stabilized the molecule was 5 minutes. So we went from 2 to 5 minutes. That was not good enough. And that's where the pharmaceutical industry ended or started their business. So, and the vomiting meant that you couldn't just increase the dose and get more out of it that way because people would be ill, they would be sick. So at Novo Nordisk, that's when they picked up this idea. They had already produced a long-acting insulin, insulin detamir, Levemir. And this was done by attaching a fatty acid chain to the insulin molecule. Then it binds to albumin in the circulation and survives. And it's not cleared in the kidneys. So this was done. Lotte Bjerre Knudsen at Novo Nordisk took the peptide to the other side of the corridor, and said, please put a fatty acid chain on my molecule here. And they did it. And that was liraglutide. So it's as simple as that, really. Simple as that. Yeah. But then came, of course, the problem of finding out, how to develop this into real medication. And again, the side effects was the problem. So if you just, you always do with dose, phase 1 trials and phase 2 trials and all that. I was involved in the design of the phase 2 trial, and we were very, very afraid of the side effects. So eventually, when the phase 2 results came out, there was not a lot of problems with the side effects, but it didn't work either. It didn't act on diabetes. So that was not terribly successful. So they had to do a completely new phase 2 trial with higher doses. And there they got the side effects, sure enough. So that just to tell you the problems of developing this, because you always had to face the side effects at the same time. So actually it helped a little bit when John Eng at the Amylin Corporation did the Byetta molecule, which is, this serendipitous finding that there was a peptide from the Gila monster that acted on the GLP-1 receptor, which is really fun. And they were quick over there and managed to do a rapid progression. They also had the side effects, of course, but they realized that if you started slowly, you could avoid some of it. And so it worked on blood glucose and on body weight, not very much, but it did, it worked. So that was an inspiration to the investors and the people at the other companies. So again, they regained some of the courage at the Novo Nordisk company.
Yeah, and general population has been very interested in this medication, and I think it has to be with the culture. No, we want to lose weight and we want to lose it fast.
Yeah.
With not doing strong diets, and this seems to be the perfect treatment. But it worries me a lot because maybe people are overusing this medication.
See, that's an interesting question, and it's almost philosophical. But you're interested in that, are you not? And it's not my field. I'm a doctor. I'm treating diseases, right? Okay, but if you ask me as a private person, my opinion is not better than anybody else's. But why don't you ask people?
Yeah.
Why don't you ask them? Do you want this or do you not want it?
Well, they have.
I think that's
have the freedom to choose.
Exactly. So that's I think, in all fairness to our co-citizens, why don't you ask them rather than saying I have a right to have an opinion on your behalf? I mean, that to me is ridiculous.
I fully agree with you because it's the autonomy of the patient.
Exactly.
We as doctors, we have to inform them, and they have to take the decisions. But maybe sometimes doctors, we are overprotective and say no.
Precisely. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I think that is going to be my last question. From now on, what are you going to do, and what will you advise to medical doctors, medical researchers to continue this
Yes. So again, my focus is the complications, the diseases that follow, the obesity and diabetes, and again, so what my ambition is to get to a phase where we can treat the people with the metabolic syndrome and the increased risk. That is my ambition, and that of course cannot be done unless you have the health system of the given country and the pharmaceutical industry working together to solve this problem, because otherwise it will be difficulties with the supplies and the price. And so what happened in Denmark is terrible. So we have reimbursement of not Wegovy, because that's on your own, but of Ozempic for diabetes. So and people were, they realized that this was fantastic, and it's the same compound in Ozempic and Wegovy, of course. It's semaglutide, and all of a sudden the number of prescriptions for Ozempic were exploding, right? And it turned out that they were all reimbursed because this was for diabetes, and it emptied the money boxes completely. So the health system was completely emptied of money, so they couldn't pay it. It was impossible. So you had to do something. So they decided that from now on you couldn't have an automatic reimbursement of Ozempic any longer. And people with diabetes would have to demonstrate that they had tried all the old-fashioned therapies first and demonstrate that they didn't work. And this is terrible, as you know, because this will increase the complication rates. So this is really, really, really terrible. And it hasn't been, so Novo Nordisk as a reaction, they put down the price. They did that. But a little bit too late, and the things are not really settled yet. But it's just to say that when something like that happens in a society, things may go completely wrong. And here, the money stopped. I mean, the money was not there any longer.
But that implies something on ethical issues, because we know that there is a good treatment that is going to help the patients, but
ethical and political, of course.
Yeah, of course.
That's what happened in our country. Well, the whole thing was developed. So,
well, in Spain it happens the same. You cannot prescribe any of these drugs for diabetes unless they have tried many others and they have failed, and it's very, very difficult.
So that's really. But in the future, of course, there are probably good news ahead of us. First of all, there are many companies now trying to develop GLP-1s, and many countries claim that it will go off patent, and they will not respect the patent after 2026 in Russia, in China, in South America. So there will be a large number of providers of these sequences, and the same is true for tirzepatide, actually. In addition, the development now is small molecules, chemical entities like the one from Lilly, which is called orforglipron, which really looks very, very promising. And that's much, much easier to produce in large amounts, which means that it will be cheaper, a lot cheaper. So after some time, we will see a situation where the supplies are much better and the prices will come down. And that will be, of course, helpful. And it's unavoidable. This will happen, there's no doubt.
We'll be able to fight against the metabolic syndrome,
Exactly.
which is going to be one of the main problems for general population in our countries.
Of course, I see it as a problem that life has become such that a quarter of the adult population will develop the metabolic syndrome. I mean, what is happening here? But it
because
is,
we are living longer, probably.
Yeah, so you don't have to work so hard anymore physically, and there's a lot of food which costs nothing. So what else can you expect that will happen with the hereditary disposition to develop obesity and its complications, right? So this could almost have been predicted. But I see it as a real possibility that you can do something about it.
Thank you very much, Professor Holst. Gregorio Marañón used to say that the most important tool that have the doctors was the chair, because we were able to talk to the patients face to face. Now it has been a pleasure for me to have these chairs and the opportunity to talk to you and to learn so much about your research.
Thank you very much.
Congratulations for the prize.
Thank you.